Let's come back from the break, please. Thank you. We are back after a lunch break, and we'll begin with whatever statement Mr. Maxwell would like to make. Thank you, Mr. Maxwell. Mr. Knight.
Thank you. Madam Hearing Officer and board members, good afternoon. Well, we are here once again, but this is not day 5 of the hearing. We are not here to reconsider or relitigate the rule. We are only here to decide if the movements have met the 4 factors from the Tenneco case, which is the standard for granting a stay in Mexico. Once again, they have misstated what the rule does, how the rule works, and what the rule requires. They don't talk about the flexibility that is built into the rule, flexibility that was carefully thought out and discussed with the manufacturers before the rule was proposed. I am forced to conclude that they just haven't taken the time to understand how this rule works. They don't talk about all the different initiatives, programs, plans, projects, incentives, and grants that are now in place and that are all a part of the implementation of this rule. Once again, they imply that the rule will make them spend money for upgrades they say they are already doing, or upgrades their manufacturers were already requiring before the rule was passed. Once again, they point to a business model that is admittedly under a lot of pressure and blame the rule for effects that started before the rule was adopted and that will continue long after the appeal is decided. They are still relying on misdirection and biased news stories to make their case, and we trust that you will give all of that kind of evidence the weight it deserves. Stays are granted very rarely and with good reason. Granting a stay of a rule like this would be very disruptive to the manufacturers, none of whom, I will note, are here today asking for a stay. Put yourself in the shoes of the manufacturer. The rule is adopted. They have to gear up to comply. The rule is stayed. Now they don't. The rule is later upheld on appeal. Now they do again. What the manufacturers have repeatedly told us they want is certainty. If they know what the standard is and they know the time frame, they can adapt and they can plan. What would be most harmful to them would be this ping-ponging back and forth. Staying the rule would, in fact, take away the manufacturer's ability to earn early action credits, which are critical to their ability to meet the delivery requirements during the first compliance year. Regarding the 4 Tenneco factors, we went into those in great detail in our written response, but I wanted to touch on just 2 of them here. First, irreparable harm. It is not enough for the dealers to merely say that they will be irreparably harmed. They have to show it. They have to prove it. And they have to prove the irreparable harm is to them and not to third parties, which is hard for them to do since the first compliance model year is not until 2027 and because the delivery requirements apply to the manufacturers and not to the dealers. It is also not enough for them to say that they have raised significant concerns with the rule. That is not the standard here. Irreparable harm does not mean inconvenience. It does not mean extra cost or effort. It does not mean an assertion or a belief that harm will occur at some future time. It means a showing that irreparable harm will occur specifically to them and only because of this rule, not because of global trends or business decisions made by the manufacturers. They have talked about harm. They have claimed it in very general terms, but they have a hard time coming forward with actual evidence of irreparable harm that is tied directly to a rule that does not impose any delivery requirements on them. The second factor I want to touch on is the harm to the public interest if a stay is granted. As you heard during the rulemaking, vehicle exhaust is made up of all sorts of pollutants, including carbon monoxide, particulate matter, nitrogen oxides, sulfur dioxide, and carbon emissions that are the primary driver of climate change. Exposure to particle pollution ages lung tissue and reduces lung function, and it can lead to cancer, stroke, heart problems, COPD, and other lung and vascular issues. It can aggravate asthma and is linked to neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and other types of dementia. Particle pollution led to more than 107,000 premature deaths in the US in 1 year alone. That's more than the number of people killed each year in homicides and traffic accidents combined. If a stay were granted, the air quality benefits of the rule would also be put on hold. What New Mexicans want is clean air and to be free from asthma and other respiratory diseases. That is what is in the public interest. When this board adopted Advanced Clean Cars 2, it made national headlines. It was a concrete step in the global effort to address climate change. It was one of the most significant single steps these boards have ever taken to improve air quality in our state. There are more EVs on the road now than there have ever been. More public chargers are coming online every week. The federal and state tax credits are in place. Incentives from P&M and other utilities are in place. The regulatory tailwinds are in place, and we need to keep that momentum going. The demand for fully electric cars is growing in the US. The nation crossed a key threshold at the end of last year. 1.2 million electric vehicles were sold, a 46% jump from 2022. Consumers are going to plug-in hybrids, which are a very important part of this rule, and which will be critical in helping the manufacturers meet the delivery requirements. Lower priced EVs are coming, but if this rule is stayed, New Mexico may not see many of those for quite some time because they are most assuredly being delivered to Section 177 states first. New federal standards were just adopted, but that makes having the rule in place even more important, as now New Mexico will be competing against all 50 states for those electric vehicles, and without the delivery requirements of the rule, we would definitely be left in last place. And that's what it comes down to. If the rule is stayed, New Mexico returns to the back of the line. There is no going back. We should not want to go back. For all those reasons, we are asking you to deny the stay. And with that, I would like to call my first witness, Mr. Jerry Valdez.
You would raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that you will tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Valdez, would you state your full name for the record and introduce yourself to the boards?
Chair, board members, my name is Jerry Valdez, Executive Director with the Department of Transportation.
And Mr. Valdez, you submitted written testimony in this matter. Would you summarize that written testimony now for the boards?
Yes. Chairs, members of the committee, I submitted a statement that I'm prepared to summarize today. And I wanted to give an update from the infrastructure questions that have come up regarding this rule. The Department of Transportation, under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, enacted in 2001, November of 2001, received New Mexico Department of Transportation received $38.3 million from $5 billion that was made available to states to advance a robust network of charging infrastructure across the nation. This $5 billion investment was broken down into two pots. One being the formulaic funding that each state received that was appropriated and apportioned to Congress. And the other was the discretionary grant funding that was provided for states to apply for additional funding for community and corridor charging along New Mexico's and other states' community and corridor locations. We received $38.3 million for the purpose of advancing our network of charging infrastructure along 3 designated alternative fuel corridors around New Mexico. It represented 2,200 miles of alternative fuel lane miles, them being primary, the corridors, your interstates, and primary arteries through New Mexico. We also, in 2021, received an appropriation from the New Mexico legislature for $10 million from ARPA, COVID relief funds. Those fundings went towards expanding EV infrastructure, and I think I spoke about that at the last hearing in regards to rural New Mexico. The strategy was to use that $10 million in areas and locations that otherwise would have not or may not have qualified for federal funding. So I'm happy to announce that we have approximately over 50 charging stations that have already come online with that $10 million, with an additional 36 stations scheduled to come online by the end of next quarter, June 30th. That represents the first $10 million of investments that went into the state with the $10 million investments made by the state legislature. The $38.3 million, which is the next pot of money, I'm happy to announce that the first phase has already been a call for project went out. We selected 20 locations across I-40, I-10, and I-25, approximately, but not exact, 50 miles apart from each other, represents 20 locations along all 3 of our major interstates. Those awards have gone out to contractors with an estimated construction completion of at least the next 12 months. Happy to also announce, as I mentioned, the $5 billion is broken out into 2 pots of funding, one of them being the formulaic funding, which we received $38.3 million. But the 40% of funding through BIL, IIJA was also discretionary grant funding, which allows states to apply for discretionary grant funding. And we were fortunate enough, under the first call of projects under the federal NOFO, Notice of Funding Opportunity, to receive in the state of New Mexico an additional $67.7 million of discretionary grant funding to expand EV charging infrastructure in our state. That was broken up into 3 awards, one for Taos, which was $500,000, another for Santa Fe County, which was $3.3 million. The Department of Transportation received the largest portion of the award at $63.8 million. That we have a contractor and we have project scheduled. We're actually negotiating our contracts right now to get that project off the ground. And it encompasses 2 large EV infrastructure locations along I-10 for medium to heavy vehicles in Vado and Lawrenceburg, which will have 9 high-level EV charging pull-through locations along that freight corridor. Because we only were able to get those 20 locations, which is what we called for, and it was only $11.9 million for those awards. That means we have the remainder of the $38 million, which a call will be going out in the summer for the additional 1,200 miles of alternative fuel corridors in New Mexico. So that gives us a little over $27 million to continue our build out of EV charging infrastructure along New Mexico's corridors. We anticipate that the cost to finish the alternative fuel corridors will not meet the $27 million because of the 20% match. When I'm telling you the numbers, it only represents the 80% that we've received formulaically. It also includes 20% that private companies that partner with the state of New Mexico also must put into the building of the infrastructure. So when we finish the alternative fuel corridors along the additional 1,200 miles, whatever funding is left over will be able to go into communities and to help fill the gaps with that remainder of the funding that was not used for the alternative fuel corridors. Also, in this year's legislative session, we were appropriated an additional $15 million. That $15 million will also go towards filling in those gaps in areas that do not meet the federal requirements for the formulaic funding under NEVI, National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. So that $50 million will be utilized for rural communities with the focus on Justice 40 and ensuring that every community gets charging, and that even the most rural, disadvantaged communities will be able to participate and take advantage of EV charging in their community.
Thank you. Sounds like DOT is on it. My witness is available for questions.
Mr. Maxwell, do you have questions of Mr. Valdez? Thank you. Mr. Domenici.
Good afternoon, Mr. Valdez. Just a couple of quick questions. I think you've been here this morning, haven't you?
Yes, I have.
So you understand the request here is that that my clients are asking that this board put a stay or delay of the implementation of the clean cars portion of the regulation in effect while their appeal is pending. Is that your understanding?
Yes, sir.
And whether or not this board grants that stay or denies the stay, all of the actions you've just described are going to continue full speed ahead, correct?
Mr. Domenici, Chairwoman and members, yes, that is correct.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bach, do you have questions? All right. Let's start with the City County Board. Chair Paul, do you have questions of Mr. Valdez?
I don't have any questions. Thank you.
All right. Vice Chair Richards.
Yes, I just had one question, and I don't know if you know the answer to this since you're working with the state DOT, but have similar grants been provided to City of Albuquerque to strengthen the infrastructure for EVs here?
There chairs, members of the board, I'm happy to announce that just recently from a funding source outside of the funding sources I mentioned, we provided a grant to the city of Albuquerque under our carbon reduction program for $3.8 million to the city of Albuquerque to advance their electric infrastructure in the city of Albuquerque, as well as a project that they have designated at the Sunport.
Thank you very much. That's all I had.
Thank you. Member Armijo? Member Galuski?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Coleman? Good. I'll move then to the EIB. Member Garcia.
Sir, do you ballpark idea of state? Yeah.
Member Garcia, members of the board. So we've been really focused on level 3 because we're really looking at the mobility and the ability for individuals to traverse our state. From a level 2 perspective, of course, it's going to take additional time to charge your vehicle, anywhere from 3 to 6 hours, depending on the type of vehicle. So let me first speak about what we have done, and that's level 3. Level 3 charger can range from anywhere between $100,000 to $250,000 per charging infrastructure. So that means if you have two chargers, like we do in some rural locations, for example, in Zuni, and Picoris, and other Tierra Marias, other rural locations, we're only putting 2 rather than 4. Those projects could run anywhere between $400,000 and $500,000 for 2 levels. Level 2, of course, are a little different. You can get a level 2 charging station in your home for as low as $500. And of course, that's all dependent on the infrastructure of your home. And I know that we have, in fact, put tax rebates in place through this last year's legislative process to put, I think it's a $400 rebate, so to upgrade infrastructure if it's necessary. So those can be as low as $500.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Chair Sweeney.
Yes, thank you. Just had a couple of questions that were also associated with some of the testimony we heard this morning. And you mentioned just in your response to Member Garcia about charging stations at Zuni, Pueblo, and Zuni's pretty remote, having traveled out there a number of times, as well as Picoris. Are there other tribes or pueblos that you might be coordinating with? Because I do know state highways do traverse through tribal and pueblo areas.
Chaswina, yes. So what we have done is we met with a number of our tribal partners individually. I actually drove out to Acoma, spoke to Mescalero. I was at the Huaque Pueblo, speaking with them, as well as the great opportunity to speak at a tribal summit where leaders from our pueblos and nation were present. And one of the things that we really did is Orlando Teller was there, who represents the federal program. And we spoke about, again, the opportunities and the eligibility that they had to be direct recipients of some of the federal funding. I also want to mention, and I didn't mention when the question came up about the city of Albuquerque, every local tribal governmental agency is eligible for that 40% of the discretionary grant funding that is made available outside of the formulaic process. So we absolutely have met with our tribal partners, Acoma, because of they're on the interstate, as well, of course, Hawaii and other corridor locations. We're looking at seeing what we can do to partner with them with federal funding, while in the process also discussing about their eligibility and ability to go after these funds on them for themselves, be direct recipients of funds that are being made available.
Thank you for that. And so I know a lot of discussion and testimony this morning about Navajo Nation area, being that it's very rural. I know we do have state highways that go through Navajo Nation reservation boundaries. Has there been any consultation or coordination with the Navajo Nation Department of Transportation or other other tribal representatives?
Yeah, sure. The Navajo Nation has been present during discussions at the federal level. We haven't necessarily had the same type of discussions we've had with the tribes that are already on these designated fuel corridors. Unfortunately, and this is one of the glaring issues with the federal funding that I've brought up on a number of occasions with our federal delegation while visiting them in DC, as well as our US DOT representatives, is that these designated corridors don't always necessarily represent what we believe is a true need for a rural, geographically large state like New Mexico. And so what my hope was, and what I had been advocating for, was for a de-designation of some of those corridors, which were still in discussion, because what's required is to build out the infrastructure on those locations before we could move to a location like the Navajo Nation with those federal funds. But because we now have this $15 million that is discretionarily able to be used by the state of New Mexico without no federal requirements attached to it, we definitely want to make sure that we're engaging and continuing the discussions that we've had with them, more formal discussions through those tribal summits, and let them know that although that we were advocating for these discretionary grant funding, since they have not come to fruition, we in fact do have state funds that we could help subsidize some of those projects for them in those areas.
Thank you for that. No further questions.
Vice Chair Trujillo?
Yes, thank you. I was curious if there's any factors that are possibly inhibiting your speed in completing any of these initiatives that you've set forward. Yeah, I see you've got a lot of moving parts going with these, and you're applying for a lot of different, or you're getting money from different grants and other funding sources. And I'm just curious if there's anything that's holding back the plans and the progress that you're making, if your group is able to be as efficient as can be.
Member Trujillo, members, early on, absolutely. I mean, we have a tremendous amount of lessons learned. We actually just put together a public EV user guide. We put together a working group with the governor's office to really begin to share some of those best practices that we learned the hard way. I mean, this is something new for the Department of Transportation. It's new for our energy providers. You talk about multifaceted. We're dealing with energy components like transformers in a way that supply chain issues were really an issue early on. It seems like because of now the high level of collaboration that we have. Matter of fact, yesterday I was in Las Cruces at an energy summit meeting with all of the co-ops as well as our investor-owned energy providers. We've also met and had discussions from a broadband perspective. Think about connectivity, being able to pay for that charge with a credit card, making sure it's secure, right, over the network. Those are all issues. What DOT does really well is we can build things. We can build the heck out of anything. But now you're dealing with energy, you're dealing with connectivity, and there is such an amazing collaborative effort on every front, from energy, Drew Lovelace with the broadband group, as well as even our payment processing requirements from a state perspective, utilizing our merchant, which is Wells Fargo, and how do we navigate being able to collect funding through a third-party payment processor. There's a tremendous amount of lessons learned that we put together. I'd love to share that public guidebook that just got completed, that you can see that some of those lessons learned are captured, which will also allow, when we're talking about City of Albuquerque, Navajo Nation, and all governmental agencies, what we want to make sure is we're setting them up for success, that they don't have to figure this out. We already took the bumps and the bruises, and we can share those best practices. We put it together in a guide. It's actually in my pocket. And that way they can really learn from our experiences. And so you're right. We've learned, and now we're firing on all cylinders. I didn't print the book, but what we did is we did QR codes. We're utilizing technology, right, to make sure that we can put a URL, people can log in, and still be a resource for those communities that can go after those large buckets of money that the federal government is making available, that they don't have to come to the DOT. We support them. We provide technical guidance and support, and we make sure that they have the tools to be successful in their own electrification plans beyond just the DOT, because we're only one part of this story. We have private investors like Tesla and others who just made available their charging networks to Ford and other manufacturers. So we're just supplementing, not supplanting this build out in a way that we are all working towards this meeting.
And thank you for that. So kind of bring it back around, one of the thing that we're considering here is the stay of a portion of this rule. And so I'm wondering if we were to grant that stay, would that impact, would it have, in your opinion, would it have any impact on the progress that your group is making?
Well, and I think, so the quick answer is no. And I think, like even Mr. Garcia mentioned, electric vehicles are coming. They're on their way. The adoption rate is what it is. I mean, I can't speak towards that. I'm not a professional in that aspect, but it's not going to slow us down. I get calls from constituents about when I'm going to put infrastructure in their community because they're considering buying an electric vehicle. So we talk about the options. We talk about home charging. We talk about the ability that 80 to 90% of their charging is going to happen at home. So that, they have an understanding that there's rebates available for them to make these installations. And if it makes sense that we supplement a charger in their location, then we're absolutely willing to consider and look at it from a location perspective in our GIS planning that we're going. But it's not going to slow us down. The funding is made available. Right now, I'm sitting on, $132 million, not of potential funding, not of, I hope I get it funding. I have $132 million that I'm currently working for the build out of EV infrastructure in New Mexico, with the hope that I get more on the next round of discretionary grant funding. Imagine if I got another award, just like I did this last February, $67.7 million, that would put us at about $200 million of funding. But right now I have $132 million that I'm building.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate your enthusiasm for your job. You seem to very much enjoy it.
I absolutely love my job. Well, more than anything, thank you guys, because it's the same deal. We're all working to make New Mexico better, right? This is really what this questions are all about. And, we're all part of something that's new. We're actually trailblazers into something that's generationally changing the fabric of what we're doing in America and in our state. And, I want to make sure that I'm part of that. So thank you for recognizing.
Thank you. Member Ely?
No questions.
Member Bitzer?
I have no questions. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr.
I have no questions.
I don't know if you guys wanted any of that guide, but I do have them. I'll leave them with Thank you.
I would like to call my second witness, Claudia Borchert.
Would raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth? I do. Thank you.
And could you state your full name for the record and briefly introduce yourself?
How close? Really close? That good? All right. Good afternoon. My name is Claudia Borchert. I'm Climate Change Bureau Chief in the Environmental Protection Division within New Mexico Environment Department.
And Ms. Borchert, you submitted written testimony in this matter. Is that correct?
Yes, I did.
And would you summarize that written testimony for the boards now?
Yes. Good afternoon, Chair Sweeney, members of the EIB. Good afternoon, Chair Paul, and members of the Air Quality Control Board. It's nice to see all of you again. I am here today to confirm that there is no good cause to approve the move-in's motion for stay on 20.2.91 NMAC, particularly sections 108 and 109. In New Mexico's adoption of of California's advanced clean car. By staying this rule, substantial harm will result to the auto manufacturers, the primary regulated party, Part 91, and harm will ensue to the public interest. Let me elaborate. Saying the rule will result in harm to the auto manufacturers who will lose, and I want to repeat, lose the opportunity for an easier glide path towards the first 4 compliance years because of the suspension of all of the New Mexico and the ACCII pre-compliance flexibilities that are built into Part 91. Auto manufacturers understand this advantageous economic opportunity in New Mexico's rules. And as our attorney pointed out, I note that not a single manufacturer is seeking to stay or appeal any sections of Part 91. New Mexico NMED's exhibits demonstrate that the Alliance for Auto Innovation, which is the trade group for around 98% of the manufacturers, have been educating their members on the opportunity and the actions that auto manufacturers must take to avail themselves of the early action credits. Manufacturers have already contacted the Climate Change Bureau inquiring about how to report model year 2023 deliveries so that they can earn those early action credits. The board may also be aware that earlier this week, Stellantis reached an agreement with California Air Resources, CARB, indicating their support of Advanced Clean Cars 2 in California and other Section 177 states. They've committed to spending $6 million for infrastructure in Section 177 states, which would include New Mexico if the rule is not stayed. Also, because auto manufacturers know that every PHEV and BEV they deliver to New Mexico right now in model year 2024 and in model year 2025 will also earn early action credits, they are highly motivated to deliver vehicles now. This is by design. Staying Part 91 will disincentivize deliveries from manufacturers, reducing consumer choice in New Mexico and postponing the important health benefits from the rule. I would like to clarify a few points regarding the straightforward rule and the straightforward flexibilities therein. Movements continue to cite maximum percentage compliance delivery requirements under the rule. We keep hearing about 43, 51, 59, 80%, but specifically 43, 51, 59 for model years 27, 28, and 29. However, the more realistic scenario that NMED presented during the rulemaking showed that manufacturers could deliver approximately 17%, 22%, 30% for those model years. Another option that's come up today is that manufacturers could deliver zero, absolutely no ZEVs to the state and purchase credits from other manufacturers who have overcomplied. In that case, a manufacturer like Toyota, for example, could make a decision that their delivery to New Mexico for the first 3 compliance years would be 0%, 0%, and 0%. In which case I'm not clear on what the harm would be to the movements. Staying the rule today further harms the auto manufacturers by not allowing them to get the credits for the vehicles to deliver to New Mexico in this critical year as consumers take advantage of the up to 3 vehicle purchase incentives available to New Mexicans right now. The rule also harmed the New Mexican car consumers who, because of limited selection or long ordering wait times, may not be able to take advantage of the multiple rebates and tax credits available this year, and therefore are not able to benefit from the affordability opportunities of total cost of ownership. Right now, and this was not the case in November during the hearing, some income qualified New Mexicans can save $14,000, up to $14,000 in qualifying new electric vehicles by combining federal, state, and utility incentives. This qualified car buyer can also save, on average, an additional $7,383 from the lower fuel and maintenance costs over the next 10 years. That's over $24,000 in savings over 10 years. This is the cost benefit analysis that NME completed in support of the rule. At NMED, it is my job to understand a vehicle emission performance standard, which by definition do not have any references in the EPA technical analysis that show a percentage of compliance that now the federal performance standards have is only a scenario. It is not an actual mandate, and therefore has no direct correlation to the requirements under ACCII. I think it's important that we not confuse that. One point, and also on the point of the EPA waiver, waivers often take years to grant after they're requested by CARB. So it's not surprising that EPA hasn't acted on CARB's request yet. The waiver is ultimately only needed when California or any other ACCII state wants to take compliance actions against a manufacturer who is not complying. So the absolute earliest that need arises is May of 2027. Here we are, 2024, 3 years away. And again, in the flexibilities in ACCII, a manufacturer can ask for postponement of compliance for years. So it's if a manufacturer is not in compliance with model year 2026, they could ask for forgiveness basically and comply years later. So the issue of the waiver is to me it demonstrates it means that people need to understand what waiver to be or not. Regarding public interest, staying the rule harms those New Mexicans who want to buy new cars, who will be left behind when manufacturers preferentially deliver a greater selection and more affordable options of these clean technology vehicles to those approximately dozen states with the ACCII rule. Staying the rules also harms New Mexicans in the used car market, who will have fewer PHEVs and BEVs to choose from, and thus less opportunity to benefit from lower fuel costs and lower maintenance costs. Staying the rule also harms those New Mexicans who benefit from community mobility programs that will be developed under the rule. Not all New Mexicans choose or can own vehicles. Among all 50 states, Mexico has the third highest percentage of families living below the poverty line, 13.8%. Mexico also has the highest percentage of its population receiving food stamps at 17.5%, and the highest percentage with public health coverage, almost 50%. Those individuals prefer or need public transit, ride sharing, car sharing, or other alternative options will be harmed by staying the rule and delaying the implementation of mobility programs that work for them. Finally, staying of the rule delays the rule's clean air. Staying the rule continues the emitting of soot and smog into the air that we all breathe here in New Mexico. This is particularly harmful for those 1 in 7 New Mexicans who suffer from devastating respiratory disease, asthma, and COPD, according to the American Lung Association. These New Mexicans spend on average $3,000 in medical. Delay in bringing more clean cars to New Mexico delays their relief from suffering. And to be clear, the federal rules will not have the same air quality impacts in New Mexico as Part 91. NMED brought forward Part 91, recognizing that the rule provides the choice for all New Mexicans to have access to the best clean energy vehicle technologies. Choice to access. As demonstrated by the objective, science-based evidence presented at the hearing, the rule significantly benefits the health and environment for all New Mexican communities, whether they purchase a PHEV or not. Now, 4 months later, the weight of the evidence presented still stands, and both the auto manufacturer specifically and all New Mexicans generally will be harmed if the program is paused pending the.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would just like to follow up on a couple points there, just to make it perfectly clear. This rule does not require any manufacturer to deliver electric vehicles to any specific dealership in the state. Is that right?
Chairs and boards members. Yes, the rule is a statewide requirement and specific to any one location.
So a manufacturer can meet their requirement without delivering any electric vehicles to, say, Gallup, for instance.
Chair and boards, and yes.
Yeah. And one further thing, you saw the letter from the Navajo Nation president, is that correct?
Chairman and chair and members of the board, boards. Yes, I did.
All right. And you've read that letter, is that right?
Yes, I have.
Okay. Does that letter ask for a stay of this rule?
The board, no, it does not.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions I have. The witness is available for questions from others.
Thank you, Mr. Knight. Mr. Maxwell, do you have questions of Ms. Borchert? Thank you, Mr. Domenici.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. Ms. Borchert, talk about Section 108. I know you talked quite a bit about Section 109. What does Section 108 actually require take place, and when?
I would like a moment to pull that up. Could you please repeat the question?
What does Section 108 require and when?
Does it require and when?
Let me break that up. What does that require manufacturers do with respect to model 2027 vehicles that they want to deliver new models in New Mexico?
Section 108A requires that they follow the CCR, which is the California Rule Title 13, Section 1962.4, which has the requirements of the delivery of it's the ACCII rules.
I think you mentioned earlier that that is 43% ZEV vehicles, with the understanding that some of that 43% can be satisfied by credits. Is that correct?
the maximum is 43% for that year, for the model year 2027.
And that's delivered to dealers, correct?
They need to deliver that to the state.
Have any reason to believe that that delivery will go other than to dealers within the state?
I do. I think there are some examples where that would happen.
So perhaps a small part of that might go directly to customers. Is that correct?
Yes. And also to what are considered vertically integrated manufacturers that don't have dealers, that don't go through dealers.
And the ones that go to dealers, and you agree some of those will go to dealers, right?
Yes.
Those dealers, they don't have to sell them, right? They can let them sit on their lots.
There's nothing in this requirement that requires dealers to do anything with the vehicles that the manufacturers deliver to the state.
And if they don't sell them, they cannot get ICE vehicles. If they've already reached their maximum ICE vehicle in proportion to the ZEV vehicle, correct?
That's a distinction that this rule does not address ICE vehicles.
You understand that there is, you at least acknowledge from your position, there's a possibility that mandatory vehicles will sit on dealers' lots and there will not be a market for them in model 2027 vehicles that are required to be delivered to New Mexico. You at least acknowledge that possibility, don't you?
No.
So I just want to get your testimony. On behalf of the state of New Mexico, you're guaranteeing that all ZEV vehicles that are delivered to dealers in compliance with this regulation, model year 2027, will be sold by those dealers, correct?
I'm not making any guarantee.
You're not acknowledging that they possibly will be unsold, though. So let me just repeat. While not making a guarantee, while being unwilling to make a guarantee, you're not willing to acknowledge the possibility that those vehicles will remain unsold, correct?
The inner workings of the dealers and what happens on their lots and whether vehicles stay there or not, whether they get sold, is not the part of the work that I am an expert on.
And you don't know if those dealers will suffer irreparable harm if those vehicles sit on their lot and they're unable to sell them, do you? That's not within your expertise, right?
I am not making that determination on whether there is irreparable harm.
And have you done an analysis of the timeline that's likely to be involved in the determination of the appeal in this matter?
I understand that the appellate board has a lot on its plate and that the appeal process can take years. That's not an analysis of it's what I understand to be the case about the process in New Mexico.
If in fact the board stays Part 108 and the appeal decision comes down before any model 2027 vehicles are delivered, there will be in fact no harm whatsoever to the public interest.
No, I disagree.
There will be no emissions from vehicles that would otherwise have to be sold under Section 108 if the appellate decision comes down before any of those vehicles are ever delivered to New Mexico, correct?
The Clean Air Act, Section 177, requires that the states give manufacturers 2-year notice that of the intent to adopt California's emission standard. My interpretation of that is that if a stay is granted, and even if the appellate court makes a decision, whenever the appellate court makes a decision, that is when the clock on that starts going. So that happens in calendar year 2026. Then the rules are stayed until model year 2030.
Are the rules stayed today?
No,
Were they stayed last week?
no,
Were the manufacturers on notice last week of the 2-year time limit?
yes,
And in fact, all of the timing for the rules was set up so the manufacturers would have notice in January of 2024, correct?
yes, therefore allowing the rules to go into effect by model year 2027.
And the manufacturers have all had notice for over 2.5 months of this rule, it having been in effect, correct?
Yes. I mean, we delivered letters to all of them, giving them notice, in addition to working through people like the Alliance for Automotive Innovation.
And just kind of a final point, in terms of air emissions, air quality, and health benefits, that this request is only to stay the portion of ACC2, portion of the rule dealing with ACC2, which is set forth 108 and 109, correct?
I am aware.
And so this won't have any impact on the benefits from this rule or the other portions of the regulation.
I am aware.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Domenici. Mr. Bach, any questions? We'll start with the City County Board. Chair Paul, do you have questions of Ms. Borchert?
I do. Thank you. Good to see Ms. Borchert. Can you just restate what you said
We
about?
can't hear you.
Can't hear me. I'm not on mute.
Can see that you're not muted, but we still can't hear you. Also,
members online
the
can
screens
hear you.
over our heads went black. You can hear me though, yes?
Yes. And online, they can hear me. Yeah.
We truly can't hear you, Chair Paul. Oh. Are you typing in the chat, Chair Paul? Mr. Maxwell is asking whether the speaker is in the room. Yes, Mr. Maxwell, the speaker is in the room with us. Chair Paul is indicating that her question is very long in order to be typed. Madai, would you please make contact with the IT folks again? Okay. In the meantime, Chair Paul, I will come back to you. I'm going to focus on the folks in the room first. So, Member Ely, do you have questions of Ms. Borchert?
Yes, I do.
Hold your face pretty close to the microphone without banging.
The last question from Mr. Domenici started to go down this path, but I'm just really curious what a stay would do to the 2-year time frame model year requirement under the 177 lead time under the 177 portion of the Federal Clean Air Act. If we stay the rule, does it move the lead time out, or is the rule having been enacted by January of, or if there's a stay, would it still allow enough time or meet the requirements under the Federal Act to bring in model 27 electric vehicles to the state. Is that clear?
Madam Chair and Member Ely, I don't want to opine on a legal question. Most people that I work with interpret Section 177 of the Clean Air Act very literally, and that the rules have to be in effect and give notice for 2 years. Some people could interpret that notice for 2 years differently under a stay. I would, from my understanding and working with the people that I talk to, I think that the rule has to be in effect, then you give notice, then the compliance period begins.
So it is possible that a stay for 2 years until the appeals court makes a decision, could delay the ZEV portion of the rule far beyond model year 27, but out to model year 29 potentially.
I think that is possible, yes.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Trujillo?
I just need you to help me understand this a little bit more. I'm kind of going down the same path Mr. Domenici was in his line of questioning. You mentioned that the requirement is 43% to be delivered to the state, and I think you said that's the maximum. Did I understand that correctly?
Madam Chair and Vice Chair, yes.
Is there a minimum?
Madam Chair and Vice Chair, there is considerable flexibility under ACCII, and the minimum is 0. You can buy your way out of the delivery requirement.
Okay, and I'm just walking through this. Okay, so I don't know if there's actually a question here. So if there may not, in theory, be a delivery requirement, and the stay was granted, and the 2-year notice had to be pushed out, would there still be a violation of the rule when it does become? And if so, you just kind of walk me through that.
Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, are you saying that, okay, let's hypothetically say that the rule, the first compliance year is now model year 2029, and a manufacturer, well, all manufacturers have to comply with the rule. They have different ways in which they can do that. They could buy 100% of their delivery requirement through credits, and then deliver 0 vehicles and be in compliance. They could do nothing, and then they would be in violation of the rule. And however, the ACCII rules give manufacturers the ability to say, yes, we didn't deliver model year 2029. We plan to deliver more in 2020, 30, and 2031. We'd like to put a pause. We'd like to request pause on the compliance period and revisit it after the next compliance period.
Okay, and I'm not a big fan of hypotheticals in these particular setting environment. So I guess what I was trying to get to there was, okay, say it gets delayed to model year 2029, and that year comes up and only 30% get delivered, and the other 12% has to be made up in these credits, and perhaps that was an impact of a stay being granted. That's not a violation, correct? Is it? Or are we, I guess, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that for you. I realize I was a little confused. When we're talking about the impact from a environmental perspective, and we find that we didn't get to the 42% that we're at, say 30%, and we're making up the other 12%, are we still having social impact or environmental impact? And if so, can you walk me through that?
Chair and Vice Chair. So I want to start by saying that these are compliance requirements. And there are considerable flexibilities in how one meets those, that maximum number of 43% deliveries, both at ACCII in the California part that Mexico adopted, mostly in Part 108. And then New Mexico added additional flexibilities with the early action credits in Section 109. The reason that that was included from the New Mexico perspective is because the sooner those vehicles get delivered to New Mexico, the greater the health, the economic, and the environmental benefits. So there is, so when, if we change the, by granting the stay, those early action credits will go away. So it is unlikely that manufacturers are motivated to deliver vehicles this year, next year, all the way before that, before there is again certainty that the rules are indeed in place. And if they never go back into place, then as Andrew Knight said, we're going to be last again in the preferential delivery of new technology vehicles. I just also want to just be clear. So even if we take the first compliance year, even if you just take the first compliance year of model year 2027 for New Mexico, the credit, the flexibilities that already exist are that you can pool vehicles from other states, over deliver in Kansas, and have those come to New Mexico. You can take advantage of early actions, even under ACCII. You can also get credits for these clean mobility programs that I mentioned. And you can also get transfer credits that you have overcomplied with under ACC 1, use those in ACC 2. So those are all the ACC 2 flexibilities that already exist. What we've done in New Mexico are the early action credits and also the one-time values, where every early action credit doubles. And so for every car delivered early, manufacturers get 2 points, 2 values for those.
Thank you for walking about it one more time. And so my last question is just that if the stay were to be granted, the sale of EVs would, or the dealerships' sales of EVs would rely on the local market. What the demand for that is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Member Garcia.
Yes, I have a couple of questions. First of all, it was implied or actually stated that the Navajo Nation was not informed of the proposal for the rule and that they were not asked for input. Is that correct? Could you talk about what the tribal outreach was?
Chair Sweeney and Member Garcia. Yes, we did at least 3 outreach to all the tribal communities in New Mexico. Well, 4 actually. We reached out to all the tribal environmental directors. Those are essentially kind of my peers in all of the tribal nations and pueblos. alerting them of the rule and actually asking they wanted to learn more about them.
This includes
This includes the Navajo Nation. We also presented, well, I guess there's 5. We presented at IRAC and Interregional Governmental, sorry, I don't remember what IRAC stands for. But that is, again, a group of tribal government employees, not necessarily leaders. We also presented to IAD hosts bi-weekly meetings for all tribal leaders, IAD being Indian Affairs Department. And we gave a presentation on these rules to those tribal leaders that, to a meeting that tribal leaders are all invited to. And then we also sent out by email and by paper mail letters addressed to each tribal leader, to all the 23 Pueblos, tribes, and nations in New Mexico. That includes the Navajo Nation.
Thank you. Testimony, written testimony, they seem very adamant that if stay were granted, that New Mexico would revert back to INCARS 1, whereas Paul in hearing, our Environment Department stated that that in our decision about the rule, it was either going to be in the federal rule. It would go back to the federal rule if we didn't approve 91. So there's a conflict there.
Okay, Chair and Member Garcia. So yes, that was the testimony we gave. We still believe that if EPA grants the waiver for ACC2, ACC2 then supersedes ACC1. ACC1 is no longer a rule in California, and ACC1 goes through model year 2025. When the waiver is granted by EPA, then ACC2 becomes the law of the land for model year, or no, I'm sorry, I don't mean the law of the land, law of California and those following Section 177 states. For model year 2026, and they are in conflict. So, and it's very clear in the California rule that when ACC2 begins, it sunsets ACC1. So in our case, if we do not proceed with ACC2, we revert to the federal standards, provided that a waiver has been granted for ACC2.
Thank you. So the waiver is not granted in the next stay. If stay were granted, would we revert to the federal requirements? And in that instance,
I think there's 2 things. I'm sorry, Chair Sweeney and Member Garcia, that need to happen for us to. Well, we have repealed ACC1, so we don't even have ACC1 on the books anymore. So I think the answer is yes. We would revert to the federal standards until during a stay, and if the appeal were successful, we would revert for either of those circumstances.
thank you.
Sweeney?
Thank you for that clarification. That was along the lines of I was trying to figure out the timing of all this, and I know it's important. And I just want to bring up the last point you said about because we passed AC2, we are no longer can revert back to AC1. Is that correct?
I feel like that's a legal question.
Not without another rulemaking. That's what I would say.
Okay. And then how would that therefore affect the timing of notification to the regulated entities like the manufacturers?
Chair Sweeney, could you just make sure I know the notification of what?
Notification. Oh,
Okay.
sorry, I don't mean to talk over the court reporter or you. Yeah, so I understand the notification of any change of current regulatory rule.
Chair Sweeney, so if we wanted to go back to ACC1, we would need to do rulemaking again. We would need to notify them with 2 years. And by that point, I mean, it would be uncertain whether ACC1 still existed. ACC1 would not exist if EPA, meanwhile, granted a waiver for ACC2. Am I clarifying your question?
You are to me, and I just want to go a little bit further in the timing. I hope I can hold my thought. My head is full of allergy stuff, but so therefore, you made another statement earlier in your testimony about timing, as well as so the California rules going into effect. And then that then becoming a milestone in this timing. Therefore, if they go into effect, then that also is a milestone in terms of what can or cannot happen, meaning back to AC1 possibility. Am I understanding that correct?
Chair Sweeney, earlier what I said was that so all the manufacturers are on notice that California is planning on following their new rules, ACC2, starting in model year 2026, right? They're 1 year ahead of us. Any manufacturer could essentially, and those other Section 177 states that are also following that. Any manufacturer has to comply with the first year by May 1 after that year is over. So for model year 2026, the reporting and then the verification that all the manufacturers individually have complied happens, sometime after May 1 of the following year. The waiver from EPA grants California the authority to take action on anybody who may not be complying. So my statements earlier were saying that only if people are not complying and only if California wants to take action on those manufacturers who are not complying, the earliest they would need that waiver would be May of 2027. Is that the timeline that you're asking for me to go over? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So maybe a follow-on question is, what would be the harm in terms of for the manufacturers if we kind of delay this process that we are currently in? Could the state and then the manufacturers meet all the timelines going forward?
Well, Chair Sweeney, the first harm is what I would consider the glide path towards compliance in the early years, right? One of the harms is that they have an economic incentive to provide early action, to deliver early. And so one of the great harms to them is that that glide path goes away until some kind of decision, that whenever that stay is reversed or the rules are once again instated, that is when, those opportunities would start again. So let me think through this. So the second part of your question is there any harm perhaps to manufacturers whose first compliance year in New Mexico would be model year 2027? I think that is, I'm just going to be perfectly honest, I think is a question on whether, it's again a timing question, but is whether the notice requirement has been met. And again, just my professional opinion is that once the rules are in place again after a hiatus of some kind, that Section 177 of the Clean Air Act requires a 2-year notice. So it would, I suppose, potentially there would be no harm in the implementability of the first year compliance of model year 2027 if the rules were reinstated. Well, no, the rules would have to, if that is the interpretation that you need 2 years notice, then, and the notice always begins on January 1, right? So even if they just got stayed for a day, let's say, by my interpretation, that means that we're already into model year 2028. And if they get stayed into next year, we're into model year 2029.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Chair Paul, I'm going to try to hear you again. We did have a little bit of IT attention since we last spoke. Can you hear me?
I'm okay. My question was addressed through Member Trujillo's questioning.
Terrific. Yeah, I saw your chat messages, but I'm glad we've established now that we can hear the people on the platform. Vice Chair Richards, do you have questions of Ms. Borchert?
Yes, please. Thank you, Ms. Borchard, for going through that. I think with these sort of hypotheticals, it gets very, very murky very quickly. So I just wanted to kind of ask a high level. What I'm hearing you say is that granting a stay actually would cause irreparable harm in the following ways, whether the stay is 1 day or several or years. One would be it would cause the auto manufacturers to essentially lose this glide path credit option, which has been built into the rule. And then I also understand from what you were saying that it would also impact the community, the public, because essentially you would be deferring benefits in terms of improved air quality by extending the implementation date. And then, do you agree with those 2 points?
Chair Paul and Member Richards, yes. Okay.
I think my question is also to you, whether or not by deferring through this day, deferring implementation, that we might not also lose some benefits associated with the kind of the momentum we have that one of the earlier expert witnesses spoke to of the infrastructure, the charging infrastructure, as well as other funding opportunities. And I'm just wondering what your opinion is on that.
Chair Paul and Member Richards. Yeah, actually that's, I appreciate you bringing that up. I think that when New Mexico puts together a lot of the puzzle pieces that are necessary that lead to overall decarbonization of transportation. And there are many, right? This rule is just one. The infrastructure is another. Getting federal funding, building consumer demand, educating the public, getting the right infrastructure in place, getting the road fund to be solvent as we transition towards electric vehicles. There are many, but when I think when we falter on any one of these pieces, and the clean fuel standard too that was passed in the legislature is yet another. When we falter in any one of these, I think that EPA looks at where is their money, or not just the EPA, but the federal money that's available through the IRA right now. It is massive. And whenever we falter on any one of those, I think the federal government has to wisely decide where can we put the dollars we have best to work in a state that's going to do something with it. And together with the clean fuel standard, these ACCII rules, the ACT rules, HDO, the great work that Jerry's doing at DOT, the economic development opportunities that we're bringing forth in New Mexico, I think that right now, New Mexico is considered a good place for federal dollars to flow because we are being thoughtful and smart about the policies we're approving in this state. So a stay, I think, jeopardizes that momentum that we have. And I also just don't want to fail to mention, we are going after, I think maybe Director Mariano will testify to this, we're going after somewhere in the order of $400 million with an application that's due on April 1st. And again, when we start to roll back these policies, I think it jeopardizes our chances of getting that $400 million for New Mexico. And the money that we're going after is both for decarbonizing of transportation, but it's also very much focused on what the EPA defines as low income and disadvantaged communities, of which we have many, right? I think about landmass wise, 60 to 70% of New Mexico is identified as low income or disadvantaged communities. And we are taking those $400 million and really focusing it in those communities. That's what is also at stake here.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So I'm imagining that because we would be in a less competitive position through potentially a stay, and would lose that momentum, we would also lose the associated public health benefits in terms of health outcomes and improved air quality. Would you agree with that?
Chair Paul, Member Richards, I would, yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I just a general comment, and I guess it could be a question. In terms of this, it's almost, I have background in economics also, and it's almost like a supply and demand thing, where, if you take a back seat because you lose momentum, the supply from what the opening statement was, the supply basically dries up and goes elsewhere. And so would you agree with that as well?
Chair Paul and Member Richards, I do not have a degree in economics. And I do, what I do think is that if we are no longer a Section 177 state, we will not have the supply in New Mexico that is delivered, the diversity and the variety and the affordability of the supplies that are delivered to other states. So I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I was just, I think the opening statement to this series of expert witnesses was that that we could potentially become the last place for delivery if we were not a 177 state. So I was just asking your opinion about that.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Member Coleman, do you have questions of Ms. Borchert? Member Galuski?
My questions have been answered by the previous questioners, so thank you.
Thank you. Member Armijo? And let's go to Member Bitzer.
I have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Trujillo?
Yes, thank you. I just want to follow up on one of the questions I just heard. You mentioned that if the stay was granted, it'd be if I understood you correctly, I might have interpreted it wrong. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you were saying that if the stay is granted, then it's like rolling back the regulation and the momentum loss of momentum. Did I understand that correctly?
Chair Sweeney and Vice Chair Mr. Hill. Yes, I think that if the stay is granted, then those before whom we are making our case on all the great work we've done in New Mexico will be like, maybe not.
Okay, and I'm just trying to understand the legal map here. So whether the stay is granted or not, this is still going to the Court of Appeals, correct?
Correct.
So I'm just going to, if it were to be granted, would that be considered a rollback, or still moving? It still has to move forward to the Court of Appeals.
Really know how to answer that. It depends on who you ask, I suppose. I can't speculate as to how someone else might interpret a stay. It's up to them how they interpret it.
Well, I appreciate your candidness on that, and really, what I was kind of trying to drive at there was that I understand, from Mr. Bouchard's perspective, the need to maintain that initiative and keeping the momentum going, and so I kind of wanted to put in perspective, like whether it is a rollback or whether it's a pause, and what the impact of that would be. So if that can't be answered, if it's really up to our own discretion at this point, then I completely understand that too, and I appreciate your candidness.
Thank you. Any further questions from either board? Thank you, Ms. Borchert. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Domenici. Over to the microphone, please.
Ms. Borchard, do you have your direct testimony available?
Would that be today from this process?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't notice anything in your direct testimony indicating that if the stay were put into effect, that the 2-year notice to the manufacturers would have to be restarted. So it's correct that you didn't consider that important enough to put in your direct testimony, right?
I will, it is not in my direct testimony.
You hadn't even thought of that before today, correct?
No, I mean,
What?
that is not correct.
are you familiar with the brief that was filed by the New Mexico Environment Department in opposition to the stay?
I am.
And you agree that there was nothing in the brief indicating that if the stay were granted, that the 2-year notice to manufacturers would have to be restarted?
Yes, I agree with that. That's not in the brief.
And if in fact the board chose not to stay section 109, well, I have two hypotheticals, but let me break them up. If the board chose not to stay section 109, manufacturers could attempt to develop the credits under section 109, correct?
Could you repeat that? I just want to make sure I am following all your.
If the board chose not to stay section 109, manufacturers could proceed to acquire or develop credits under section 109, correct?
Yes.
That would be regardless of whether or not the board chose to stay section 108 or not, correct?
I would have to go back in and read the intercorrelation between those two before I could answer that, because I've always thought of them as a pair, and I don't know what the purpose would be of developing 109 if 108 is stayed.
The purpose would be that we're waiting for an appellate decision. And so if people are handicapping that decision and trying to make business decisions and saying, well, I think I'm going to go ahead and develop the credits, but I don't have to deliver this massive amount of vehicles because 108 has been stayed. They could, until the appellate court tells me I have to, they could make a business decision to go ahead and develop the credits, but they would not have to deliver the vehicles, correct?
I think he was trying to explain his question. Did you understand the question?
I do understand the question, and I'm going to go back to my because of the way they revert, especially 108 reverts back to ACCII rules, and 109 are the New Mexico specific rules. And I would really want to look at the two side by side before I made a statement about your question, an affirmative to your question.
And let me just make one thing clear. Does section 109 take effect before the waiver?
Yes, it does.
Section 108 take effect before the waiver?
No, it does not.
So they are separate in that sense, correct? One is not dependent on the waiver and one is, right?
Both are dependent on ACCII 2 being implemented.
Correct. But if the waiver is delayed for some reason or is ultimately not granted, or even before it's granted, 109 can go ahead and take effect.
Well, again, I want to think through that because 109 also has timelines associated with it that are related to the assumption that our first compliance year in New Mexico will be model year 2027. And given that I really am not quite sure what will happen either for the first stay. I mean, if the appellate court decides to do away with the rules, it's irrelevant. If they're upheld in the appellate court and there's a stay, I'm not ready to opine on that because of the timing issue.
Thank you very much. That's all I have.
Anything further, Mr. Knight? No.
Nothing further.
Thank you very much, Ms. Borchert. We need a break. So it's 3:00 on that clock. Let's break to 3:15.